To redefine the timeless definition of marriage as between one man and one woman has tremendous consequences for society. Marriage revisionists say they want marriage equality and the freedom to marry. In actuality, they want much more, because to transform society's most fundamental relationship is to transform society itself. Listen to what author and journalist Masha Gessen says, quote, "Fighting for gay marriage generally involves lying about what we are going to do with marriage when we get there, because we lie. And the institution of marriage is not going to change, and that is a lie. The institution of marriage is going to change, and it should change. I don't think it should exist," end quote. Could you imagine a society without marriage? What would that do to children? Don't they deserve a mom and a dad to raise them? What would it do to adult obligations, as multiple relationships are likely to result in multiple offspring by different partners? What would it do to the government? When family formation breaks down, the state often picks up the pieces, from providing food and housing to child care and remedial education, to juvenile detention and justice. How does changing the marriage law by making moms and dads optional help anything? Let's talk about what this debate is and what it is not. First, this is not about anyone's particular marriage. It's about the institution of marriage. Nor is it about harming homosexuals or depriving them of any rights. Nobody has the right to marry until they meet the requirements for marriage. Clearly, children cannot marry, family members cannot marry, nor can people who do not meet marriage's gender requirement. These are the ground rules. This debate is about what the state will recognize as the foundational relationship that fosters healthy families, the relationship necessary for best nurturing of children, and the relationship that allows civilization to thrive. We call it marriage. Martin Luther King Jr., in his letter from a Birmingham jail, said this, quote, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all, indirectly," end quote. How we agree to define marriage affects all of us. It will impact what our children are taught in school. It will affect private employers, and it will impact our First Amendment freedoms of speech, religion, and association. Consider that already there is an increasing marginalization of those who hold to the Bible's teaching on human sexuality and the timeless definition of marriage. Consider that in 2013, Louis Giglio was disinvited from offering the prayer at Barack Obama's inauguration because he delivered a sermon in the 1990s where he called homosexuality a sin. Gospel singer Donnie McClurkin was disinvited from Martin Luther King Jr.'s 50th anniversary celebration last summer because, as a former homosexual, he speaks of transformation from the lifestyle through Christ. Craig James was fired by Fox Sports, and now Brendan Eich, CEO of Mozilla, was recently ousted because he donated to the Proposition 8 effort in California to define marriage between one man and one woman. In the last year, several Christian business owners have faced fines and penalties for refusing to use their giftings and talents to accommodate same-sex wedding ceremonies. To be clear, they did not refuse to serve homosexuals. They refused to materially participate in a ceremony they believed sacrilegious. States that have legalized homosexual marriage are forcing bakers, florists, and photographers to accommodate same-sex weddings or face fines and lawsuits. Elaine Huguenin was fined over $6,000 by New Mexico authorities for refusing to do the photo shoot for a lesbian wedding. Jack Phillips, who owns Masterpiece Cake Shop in Lakewood, Colorado, is facing jail time for refusing to bake a cake for a homosexual wedding. The cultural gatekeepers cry tolerance, but their deeds belie their rhetoric. There is a brazen intolerance directed at those who hold biblical views on human sexuality. Tolerance is fast becoming a one-way street. Fairness appears to apply only to those the political left agrees with. The question to us now is whether members of the faith community will be allowed to work and participate in public events without having their conscience violated. Redefining marriage violates religious freedom. Christian adoption and foster care service ministries have had to shut down in Massachusetts, Illinois, and Washington, D.C. because they would have been forced to place children in same-sex households. They weren't against other agencies placing children in such homes. They simply argued that they could not in good conscience violate their religious beliefs. In Kentucky, a similar agency is under fire. Sunrise Children's Services, a 154-year-old Baptist organization, is being sued because they hold the high biblical standards for their employees. When they fired an open lesbian for violating their standards, they drew the wrath of many in the homosexual community and were faced with a lawsuit which is still unsettled. The issue is not whether they receive state money, as some have suggested, but whether private religious organizations are allowed to function according to their beliefs in society. The state, after all, holds the license for any agency in care of children. Tax-exempt status of churches is also in jeopardy. When same-sex marriage becomes the public policy of the state, churches that receive preferential tax treatment from the IRS will be expected to accommodate the homosexual community. 21 states have laws that prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation in areas of employment, housing, and public accommodation. Churches that allow non-members to use their fellowship halls or church property for weddings, for example, could be considered a public accommodation. This is what happened to Ocean Grove Camp Meeting, a Methodist organization in New Jersey that refused to allow a lesbian couple to marry on its property. They lost their tax-exempt status for that property. This will continue to happen in an age hostile to religious freedom. This is just another one of the consequences of redefining marriages. Free speech is also in jeopardy. In 2012, Chick-fil-A's CEO, Dan Cathy, shared his private beliefs about marriage in a radio interview. When Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel heard the comments, he stood at the proverbial city gates and essentially said that the fast food giant was not welcome to expand into Chicago. Emanuel said, quote, "Chick-fil-A values are not Chicago values. They're not respectful of our residents, our neighbors, and our family members. And if you're going to be part of the Chicago community, you should reflect Chicago values," end quote. Now, the university is becoming increasingly hostile to those who believe in the timeless definition of marriage. Stanford University recently denied funding to a conservative student group for their conference called Communicating Values, Marriage, Family, and the Media. Jeffrey Cohen, the vice president of the LGBT student group called GradQ, called the conference, quote, "an echo chamber of hate." Brianna Huntsman, an employee at the Stanford LGBT Student Center, said such views brought to the campus are, quote, "unsafe," and their message is very much bigotry. Welcome to the new tolerance. If the definition of marriage changes, culture will change, and along with it our cherished freedoms that we've taken for granted. It's time to sound the alarm and educate our friends, family, and fellow church members about what is at stake. It's time to stand for marriage.